Breach. 2 words that will send a Voidfarer's stomach straight into their feet. Either something they need very badly is being sucked into the vast nothingness of the endless void, or something is trying to get inside. When I was running my Starfinder podcast, Starfound, I learned one very important thing about ship combat and TTRPGs. Well, 2 things, really. The first is that ship combat is very hard to write and run well. It becomes clunky. One player ends up doing all the driving, literally, and everyone else is just kind of going along for the ride, and that's mostly not fun. The other thing that is, in my opinion, very fun, though it almost gave my players a heart attack, is that ship combat has the highest consequences of any type of play. If your players lose a fight on the ground, maybe a couple of them get away, maybe they just get captured instead of killed. There's lots of fictional flexibility there. If your player's spaceship gets destroyed, that's just it. It's over. You all end in a fiery explosion. Game over, man. This incredibly high-stakes play fits perfectly into my new favorite game to talk about, Mothership, where the stakes are always high and the dice always hate you. That's kind of an extreme version of how it feels, but Mothership is a sci-fi horror game designed to simulate a character's capability on their worst day. And today, I'm going to run you through all the rules for all things spaceship in this game of corpo-cosmic horror. You're going to want to watch this because I unwrap some things that are just not explained in the book, The Shipbreaker's Guide, at all. What are we going to cover in this video? Well, the index is going to be right there, and you can click through it down below in the doobly-doo. I'll have the timestamps listed down below. Players, I recommend you watch at least the ship manifest bit, but all of it could be useful to you. It's going to make you a better player for your Warden. Wardens, binge this sucker and comment if you get to the end with your fave space emoji. Help me recognize a fellow completionist. One thing we won't be going over is the 10 ship profiles provided in the book. I'd encourage you to make a cup of something warm and bitter and curl up and read through them. I do want to say that this book, much more than any of the other core rulebooks, is a setting guide because it prescribes levels of technology and rules for the way the world behaves in the way that the other books really don't. One of the best things about Mosh is its flexibility, so take what you want from this and leave what you don't care for, as always. In addition, there are no rules in this book for making your own ship, but if you want me to build out something like that, comment below and I'll take a shot at it in the coming weeks. Ship manifest. Okay, let's start off talking through what is on your ship manifest, aka your ship's character sheet. The Shipbreaker's Toolkit does a killer job of explaining this by laying it all out on a single page with an example filled out manifest. First off, here in the top left corner is your transponder. In the fiction of this world, the transponder is an automated radio system that broadcasts the essential details about your ship for identification purposes. It's usually a super sketchy move to turn off your transponder, but you can do it. In the transponder spot on your character sheet, you can mark if it's on or off, and you can also list the ship's name, the captain of the ship, which is important if any lawsuits arise. Fun. And you should also notate the make, model, jump level, class, and type of ship. That's a lot of information. Most of it is written out, but jump level and class is abbreviated to something like J1C2, where the number after J is how good of a jump drive the ship has, and the number after C is the class of the ship. That's basically how big it is. More on all that in ship class and space travel, respectively. Just below that is your MEGADamage tracker, which is like hit points and wound rolls all rolled into one. All ships can only take 9 MEGADamage, and each level of MEGADamage comes with a built-in complication. More on that in the MEGADamage section. Then we have our stats and our saves. On a ship, there are 3 scores that serve as both stat and save. They are thrusters, battle, and systems. These are what our ship rolls with to attempt hard things. To the right of that is our fuel and warp cores. Fuel we use to navigate within the system. Warp cores we burn out for each faster than light jump we make. And then we have our cryopods and escape pods, the number we have on the ship. And to the right of that, we have the crew, including a maximum crew number, meaning that life support can only handle so many people being on board. Interestingly, it doesn't seem to count androids as crew. In this little box here, we track weapons, and almost none of this is explained in the book. This is what I understand is correct from comparing all the different ship profiles. Please comment if you've been doing it differently. I'd love to hear. So in this box, you list all the weapons. Now it gets a little weird though, because each ship has a base mega damage that it will deal to an enemy ship if it hits. But it only gets to deal that damage if it has a weapon. The USCS Falstaff here doesn't have any weapons, so it can do no mega damage. Its only option in a fight is run. Or I guess it's called the Falstaff, so bullshit could be another option. Once a weapon is on a ship, it gives the ship the ability to do damage and improves the ship's battle stat. Mark that improvement and the ship's base stat here. Some weapons, such as heavy missile launchers, will add +1 to your mega damage, but from what I could find, adding more weapons mostly just improves your battle stat. That sounds a little weak, but trust me, it's not. Getting a better battle stat is very, very important, and the reasons for that will become clear when we start talking about combat. Now, the last bit of this box are hard points. These are basically upgrade slots where weapons can go. You can only have a number of weapons on the ship equal to or less than the hard points a ship has. At the bottom right of your sheet, we have a spot for upgrades, including current and maximum numbers. We'll get into that in detail in the upgrades section. And next to that is cargo, where you write down all the junk you're shipping around space. And below that are repairs, which is broken into minor and major repairs, aka the stuff that is just wrong with your ship right now. More on that in repairs and maintenance. Finally, we have a deck plan. This is a little grid space to draw out the simplest map of your ship or spend hours scribbling your cartographical masterpiece. But as Mothership and I both recommend, you should probably keep it simple, stupid. And that is all of the ship manifest. Bye players, have a beautiful time, or like hang out. There's a lot more to learn here. Let's talk about making checks and saves with your ship. Ship checks. Ships make stat checks just like players do. If you haven't read the Player Survival Guide or you'd like a little refresher, here is my teach of the core rules of Mothership. Zap. In order to make a ship stat or save roll, you do so by rolling a D100 and trying to get lower than your listed score. If you get equal to the score or higher, the roll is a failure. Doubles are criticals, so an 11 would probably be a critical success, and an 88 would probably be a critical failure. Ships have three main stats which represent how good they are under the extreme pressure that space and you put them under. Thrusters represent their ability to safely maneuver and speed up in space, and this is kind of like the character's speed stat. Battle is how good a ship is at targeting and shooting at other ships or whatever else they want to destroy. You're getting the pattern. This is like a character's combat stat. And just when you were getting your feet under you, let's break that pattern with the system stat. This is more like an NPC or pet's instinct stat. It represents everything else that a ship is, from computers to sensors to its life support or maintenance. Now, a big difference between ship stat checks and character stat checks is that when a ship fails a check or save, everyone on board gains a stress. When you critically fail, everyone on board makes a panic check. This makes sense because anything that goes wrong with the ship is everyone's problem. I can only imagine the cascading chaos of multiple panic checks as something groans unhealthily in the bowels of your freighter. Modifying ship checks. But we can modify ship stat checks just like personal stat checks. Advantage and disadvantage can be applied, but it has to be something significant enough that it affects the entire ship. In addition, relevant skill bonuses can be added to a ship's stat check or save, but only one character can add a skill bonus to a stat check at a time, so you can't stack proficiencies on a complicated action. Ship class. A quick note about ship class. Ship class is a sort of approximation of a ship's capabilities. They vary from 0 to 5, and generally the higher the class, the more expensive, larger, or more deadly it is. As I noted earlier, this also seems to be related to the base MEGADamage stat, but because there are no rules for building your own ships, I have no idea precisely what those are, but it seems to go as such. Class 0 ships can't deal MEGADamage. They are shuttles or fighters or drop ships. They're not mega enough to deal that kind of damage. Class 1 ships have 1 base MEGADamage. Class 2 to 3 have 1d5. And class 4 to 5 ships have 1d10 MEGADamage base stat. However, the class 3 passenger jump liner only has a MEGADamage base of 1. So this doesn't seem to be a hard and fast rule. Okay, enough about how big your ship is. Let's talk about what you can do with it. It's not the size of the buoy, but the motion in the buoy or something. I don't know. Space travel basics. Space travel is all about time. We measure space and time in light years, so duh. And here's where we start really getting into the minutia of the gritty cassette futurist setting that Tuesday Night Games has set out in Mothership and in the Shipbreaker's Toolkit. Most ships cannot take off or land from planets, leaving that to smaller craft like shuttles and dropships or escape pods, though escape pods more land on planets, right? Now, it should be mentioned that you don't need to own a ship to travel, and the Shipbreaker's Guide does us a favor and gives us prices for travel for anything from shuttling across continents to interplanetary and interstellar travel, and it is not cheap. Space travel is still incredibly rare, and most people are born, live, and die on their little space rocks. But for those of us who do get to go places and head beyond our horizons, it is an investment not just of money, but also of time. Now, interplanetary travel takes anywhere from a few weeks to reach a nearby planet up to several years to reach the edge of the system. This kind of travel uses 1 unit of fuel per month. The game advises you to charge the fuel costs up front, and that changing course will cost an additional fuel per course correction. But how do we fuel up? Why, at the port, of course. But in addition, the game adds a complication that each class of ship can only use fuel from your own class, or kind of. If you try siphoning out fuel from a ship of a lower class than yours, for salvaging rights, you can still make it work, but only works on a 2-to-1 basis, meaning that 2 fuel from that smaller ship only counts as 1 fuel in your beefy, bigger ship. Similarly, if you use fuel of a class higher than yours, you get more bang for your space buck, twice as much, in fact. This will power your ship on a 1-to-2 ratio. However, this only works for ship classes that are directly above and below yours. Fuel from a class 5 ship can't fuel a class 3 ship or lower. And if you can afford to keep it in your cargo hold and not burn through that higher class ship fuel, the best option is to sell it. Class 4 fuel is worth 10 times class 3 fuel. Now, your weapons are going to need to get refreshed too. If you use your weapons in an engagement and aren't able to resupply before your next scrap, you'll make all your battle checks at disadvantage. Your third fight without resupply, you automatically fail all tests as your weapons are bone dry. Interstellar travel. Let's talk about interstellar travel next, and it's important to note that it is only made possible by the use of jump drives. Well, I guess that a particularly large, slow ship could trundle across the infinite darkness with its crew stuck in cryo, but that's not profitable or fun to play, so we tear space-time to get there faster. I'm sure there will be no side effects and no consequences for that. Jump drives have a rating of 1 to 9, which is a standardized measure of how much distance they can bend. Most commercial vessels just have a jump 1 drive, and jump 4 and above is basically restricted. It's so advanced that only the big corpos and the interstellar militaries have them. In-game jump travel is easy, but kind of expensive. Warp cores are very expensive, but first you take about 2 weeks to reach your local jump point. This is a spot far away from other bodies that Space OSHA has decided that any catastrophic jump failure here won't cost too much. Then you hop into cryosleep and leave your handy Seegson android to watch the nav for you. Don't worry, It'll be fine. He definitely won't betray you. You don't want to stay awake because things get weird for organics in slip space, or whatever they call it, in between the jump. When you jump, there's a place in the in-between. Jump travel always consumes 1 warp core, and it takes 2d10 days. However, the book makes it very clear that jump travel is spooky and unreliable, so the Warden can do whatever the heck they want to your little venture once you've popped into cryo, be that space dilation, time wibbly wobbliness, or whatever else they come up with. Be warned. Detection and range. But now let's get into the real nitty gritty of being on a ship. All of that was a little big picture, right? The next 5 sections are about the actual running of the ship. Again, space is big, so the first thing we need to address is, well, space. There are 3 ranges in a space encounter in Mothership: detection, firing, and contact. When in detection range of each other, ships can communicate with a long delay, sometimes between minutes and hours. Ships in detection range are not at any risk of combat with each other, and they can detect each other's size and trajectory. Basically, any ship in a star system is in detection range of any other ship in that same star system. Now, technically, you can see a ship and assume that there's a transponder on said ship, but you might have to wait days to get the data from the transponder because radio waves are slower than light waves, right? Firing range is when things get dicey. Ships are still literal weeks away from each other, but now they can communicate with less than a minute of latency, so there's still plenty of time for miscommunications, which is lucky because, as the name suggests, this is where we are now close enough to shoot at each other. For clarity's sake, I want to make sure that you know that was sarcasm. Ships in firing range can also easily read transponder signals, so they have a clear sense of who they are dealing with, or if the other ship has their transponder off and they're acting a little sketchy. Finally, contact range is close, like only days away. God, space is huge. You can have an easy phone call with another ship in contact range, and obviously you can still fire at each other, but you can also attempt boarding if you have the right craft. You can also see if there are life forms on the other ship when you're in contact range, and you can get the general sense of a ship's status. And all of this leads neatly into ship combat. Combat. Ship combat is just as inadvisable as all combat is in Mothership, but we're here to have fun and probably die horribly in the blackness of space, so let's talk about it. Before you even begin, the book has a little blurb about unwinnable fights that I think is important. If your ship is 1 class higher than your opponent, you get advantage on every battle check and MEGADamage roll you make when fighting them. If a ship is 2 classes higher than another, the fight is considered unwinnable for the smaller vessel. I have no idea if this actually works out in play, but it is terrifying. And isn't that what Mothership is really all about? In combat, the rules assume that everyone on board a ship is doing their level best to win the confrontation. They're taking evasive maneuvers, they're firing at optimal targets, they're using their computers as best as they can, etc., etc., etc. And in this way, by making this assumption, Mothership does away with the incredible and frustrating minutia of most ship combat and reduces it all to very few, very, very high stakes rolls. Combat happens in ship rounds, which have 3 phases: movement, attack, and morale. The length of a ship round in the fiction is determined by range, because space is time in the void. In contact range, ship rounds are only a few minutes, but at firing range, you could have anywhere between a few hours to several days in between taking your ship action. And this makes ship combat very strange compared to what we're used to. There's an almost unspoken assumption that your warden is making you deal with something on your ship in between managing ship rounds, like some hungry xenocuriosity that wants to eat your giblets. But that may not be true. You may be just twiddling your thumbs while autocannon rounds fly thousands of miles silently through the cold black of space towards you. Cards? Anyone? No? Dice? You up for dice? Anyone want to play some D&D? That's kind of a cool idea for a Mothership game, honestly. All right, the movement phase comes first. In the movement phase, each ship makes the decision to pursue, to evade, or to maintain course, and then they decide how much fuel they are willing to burn to achieve that goal. If you are evading, you must spend a minimum amount of fuel depending on your range from the target. Contact range is the closest, and it requires the most burn, demanding a brutal 3 fuel. Evading in firing range will cost 2 fuel, and doing it in the detection range requires only 1 fuel. You can opt to spend more to try to beat a pursuer, but these are the minimum costs to run away. If you are pursuing, you can spend any amount of fuel, or even none, to try to get closer. After all of the ships involved decide their course of action and make their fuel bets, they each make a thrusters check. The ship that spent the most fuel gets advantage on the check. Now, succeeding at this roll means that you get what you want. You increase or decrease your distance by a range band. So if you were running away at firing range and you succeeded, you'd move to detection range and be safe from their missile launchers. However, if your foe was pursuing and they also succeeded, you would even out and you would stay at firing range. Now, a critical success, on the other hand, means that you make progress even if your enemy succeeds. A critical failure makes your enemy succeed at getting closer or further away, even if they failed. Now, if you chose the middle way and maintained course, you don't spend any extra fuel, but your enemy gets exactly what they want. They don't even have to roll, but they do burn any fuel they decided to bet. Now we move on to the attack phase. In the attack phase, all ships within firing range or closer choose one target and attempt a battle check. Let's go from best result to worst result here. If you critically succeed, you deal double your mega damage to the enemy ship. Boom! If you succeed, you deal your mega damage to the enemy ship. Boom! If you fail, your ship takes a point of mega damage in addition to any that foes might have dealt it. Bang! And if you critically fail, you take 2 points of mega damage in addition to any that foes might have dealt. Clang! And that is why the battle stat matters. Because every point is another percentage of chance of not taking damage just from getting in a fight. Mega damage. We mentioned it earlier, but mega damage is basically a character's damage and wound stats all bundled together to make up your ship's hit points. Whenever a ship receives mega damage, you add that incoming mega damage to any previous mega damage it's taken and mark the new total on the tracker on your ship's manifest. And then the listed effect comes into play. Now, these effects are brutal. 1 mega damage causes a fuel leak, so you burn an additional fuel each time you use fuel, so it's harder to run away. That's punishing enough, and it might leave you stranded, but it gets worse, from a fire on deck to sudden decontamination to a radiation leak, and finally at 9 or more mega damage, you roll a d10 and your ship explodes in that many minutes. Now, it should be noted that these effects are collective, but not complete. What I mean to say is that if you have 0 mega damage and then you take 4 mega damage in one turn, you don't check all those boxes and apply all the effects. No, you go straight to mega damage 4 and boom, there's a fire on deck. You then have to spend your time in between this ship round and the next ship round dealing with that chaos. I think this is remarkably clever. It makes for a very sleek system that doesn't have a lot of extra dice rolling for table reference, but which could be easily adapted for greater variability after your space pirate players have seen it all. The life support systems are down again. Typical Tuesday. Arr. Now there is only one thing standing between your ship and mega damage, and that is hull. Hull works just like armor points, but for ships. Ships ignore all mega damage less than their hull, but if your ship ever takes damage equal to or greater than its hull, the hull is destroyed, and the ship takes all the leftover mega damage and is now exposed with no protection to future damage. I mean, hull sounds super useful until you realize that none of the ships provided in the book have more than 1 hull, which means that even firing their weapons, they have a greater than 50% chance of shredding their only protection. Fun! When life support fails. Now, I mentioned this in my How to Play Mothership video, but the game has some super specific rules for managing the failure of life support on a ship. I didn't go into detail there, but talking about MEGADamage and the 6th pip of MEGADamage is life support failure, so I think it's time. If a ship's life support system goes down, you begin by rolling 1d10 and multiplying the result by the maximum crew capacity. The number you get is the oxygen supply at the time the life support failed. Every 24 hours, you subtract an amount from this supply equal to the breathing crew members on the ship. Androids, crew members in cryosleep, and space vampires do not count towards this total, but I guess some monsters might. Things continue like this until the O2 becomes less than twice the number of breathing passengers. Now, oxygen is low, and all rolls are at disadvantage as you start to suffer from headaches, fatigue, anxiety, and clumsiness, all the stuff that people who aren't getting enough oxygen suffer from. Maybe that's what's wrong with me these days. That was dark. Now, if the supply drops below the number of passengers who need to breathe, every breathing body on the crew must make a body save. If they fail that, they immediately make a death save. Once the supply is gone and the body save has been passed around, anyone still kicking has 15 seconds before they pass out. They then have 1d5 minutes before they are dead, and they make a death save. I love this mechanic. The slow counting down to death and asphyxiation would be so intense as you scramble to fix the life support as something that feels very at home in the void hunts you through the bowels of your ship. Oh my gosh, that's a whole Mothership game I just prepped for you. You're welcome. Back into talking about the last phase of the combat round. The morale phase. After any ship round where MEGADamage is dealt to an enemy, they must make a morale check, where they roll a d10, and if the result is under the amount of MEGADamage they have taken, they want to quit. The Warden decides how that manifests. They will probably send a hail offering to ceasefire or negotiate. No one deserves to die alone in space, and it's worth negotiating. Heck, the tables might turn on you. Finally, after any fight where your ship takes MEGADamage, you make a systems check, and on a failure, your ship takes on some new issues, which is manifested as a roll on the maintenance issues table. You roll twice if you critically failed. More on that in a bit. Distress signals. Okay, this is peak Mothership. Let's say the fight goes really bad and you're left stranded, or maybe even worse, you're out of fuel and you're floating in the dark. You're bingo on options and you have no more good ideas and you have nothing left to do but turn on your distress beacon and wait. Mechanically, you roll a d10 on the distress signals table, which is kind of like a death save for all of you. The results here span from a 2d10 week wait time at best to several decades as your body rots in cryo, or the mathematically probable result, your ship floats forever in the nothingness of space. Your matter lasts until the heat death of the universe, when you and everything else becomes vibrating blackness. Thanks for playing Mothership. Repair, refuel, and maintenance. Two certain ways to avoid that horrible fate is consistent maintenance of your ship and keeping that gas tank full. So let's talk about the little quirks that ships have and how we keep ourselves from the worst fate a Voidfarer can face. Every ship starts with some funky little stuff, some little quirks, a little bit of wear and tear, you know, the stuff that the dealer didn't tell you about. When you get a ship, you start by rolling 1d5 plus 1 repairs from the maintenance issues table. Some of these are small things, like the terminal displays not working, or the circuitry kind of overloads sometimes, or the plumbing is a little backed up from that one time Bob ate that thing on Gemini. We do not talk about the thing Bob ate on Gemini. So some of these are kind of small, and some of these are big, like a bug in your jump drive that gives you a 10% chance of your 2d10 days in jump turning into 2d10 weeks. Or your cryopods just give you ceaseless nightmares that extend your cryo sickness for a whole week. Or maybe a radiation leak that is degrading your stats the second you step on board. You know, Fun stuff. In addition, once per in-game year, you perform a maintenance check that is mechanically a systems check. If you succeed, everything continues as normal. Good job for taking care of your ship, Captain. But if you fail, you gain a new maintenance issue, and everyone on board gains 1 stress. If you critically fail, you get 2 new problems, and everyone panics as something snaps in the bulkhead of the ship. Having a teamster who is just there to keep the bolts tight on your rust bucket may grant you advantage on this yearly check if your warden allows, and if they haven't developed any chemical dependencies that keep them from doing their job. That's also just a joke. That's not in the rulebook. But Miles, how do I fix these compounding problems on my precious ship? Well, I'll tell you. Minor repairs that cover the less demanding results on the maintenance issues table require some elbow grease and can be handled by competent crew members while the ship is in flight. They take about 2d10 days to sort out. If you're under time constraints, or if you don't have the tools or parts to make the fix, there might be a personal stat check to see if you can make it work. And if you critically fail, the problem gets worse, upgrading to a major repair. Major repairs are large scale and are structural, or represent damage to the system. These rules also cover repairing MEGADamage and the ever valuable hull points. Now, these fixes can only be done in a serious port, and each point of hull or MEGADamage repair counts as a separate major repair for cost purposes. Also, each one can take from a few months out to a whole year, depending on how bad the damage is and how easy it is to get parts and labor at whatever hive of scum and villainy you pulled into for repairs. Each major repair costs 1d5 million credits multiplied by the ship's class to fix. Oh, that hurt to say out loud. Ready to go into debt? Bankruptcy Saves. Fun! Okay, so the book has a whole section on who pays the bills, and this stuff is dry. So let's make this quick and easy, because actually the system, frankly, makes it pretty quick and easy. The first question is who owns the ship, because that decides a lot of what you have to pay for as a player. If the company owns the ship, they pay for everything relating to your ship, as long as Linda from accounting approves it. Be nice to Linda. Bring her coffee and donuts every time you go to see her. If the military owns your ship, they pay for everything relating to your ship. And hey, they might even help you train up to get better or upgrade the ship. But of course, you'll have to follow orders. Easy so far, right? It gets harder. Then we have freelancers. If you own the ship and you have no holds on you, I mean, go you, but you're paying for everything. Good luck. Now, owner-operators are a little more complicated. Basically, an owner-operator owns the ship, but the banks have paid for it, and they take most of your profit. As an owner-operator, you get the privilege of having a brand new save, the Bankruptcy Save. Fun! This stat starts at 2d10 plus 10, and each year or quarter, if your warden is a sadist or a capitalist, you make a bankruptcy save and then check the handy-dandy bankruptcy table to see how bad things are for you. Success could be getting minor repairs or fronting a bonus for your crew. Failure is debt, or worse, bankruptcy, and massive debt to the worst possible people imaginable. Mothership, upgrades, and weapons. But let's assume you're doing okay. Or maybe you're working for the military, or the company is really pleased with you and you're getting the rare pleasure of upgrading your ship. Let's talk upgrades and weapons. Basically, you need to first be at a specific class of port, either X, B, or A. Those are criminal settlements or pirate bases for X. B-class ports are blue-collar, industrial, or large-scale military ports, and A-class ports are metropolises or trading centers. Now, S and C-class ports are not going to be able to retrofit upgrades on your ship because S-class ports are pleasure boats for the uber-wealthy, and Class C ports are space hamlets. They're tiny little spots that won't be capable of that massive undertaking. Every ship has a maximum number of upgrades, and when you're looking to install an upgrade, the upgrade tables have a price, an installation time, and a description for each of the possible upgrades the game has provided. All of this is obviously contingent on the labor and parts being available, and in addition, each cost listed there is for Class 1 vessels only. In order to get bigger upgrades for bigger ships, you multiply that cost by the class of the vessel. That means that streamlined fuel injectors on a beefy Class 5 ship would cost you 250 million credits. That is a whole bucket full of credits. Similarly, weapons can be installed, but they don't take up upgrade slots, they take up hard points. Each weapon takes about 2 weeks to install and gives you a bonus to your ship's battle stat. The cost listed on the table works the same as with upgrades. You multiply per class of ship, and you can only have a number of weapons on your ship equal to or below the hard points on your ship. But you can install a new hard point on your ship for an upgrade spot. Class 0 vessels. Finally, a quick note about Class 0 vessels. These are spacecraft not designed for interplanetary or interstellar travel, but to help skip the distances between ships, or between a ship and a planet's surface or a space station. Now, the book gives you prices for a few different types, how long it can travel for in space, and a description of each of these types. I especially love the utility pod and the fighter. Each fighter gives +1 to your battle stat up to a max of 10. I mean, how cool would it be to have a carrier full of fighters? That's my ideal Mothership game. Okay, that's it. That's all the rules. If you got this far, please consider subscribing if you are in need of more Mothership content. I'm going to be making more of it. And comment either your favorite space emoji, or maybe better, a question that you have or something that you think I'm doing wrong or that I gave incorrect in this video. I'd love the comments section to be like an easy resource for people who are learning how to play Mothership better or with their own homebrews. I'd love to hear some spaceship rule homebrews in the comments. If you like my content a lot and this is the second or third video of mine that you watched, or if you really vibe with me, check out my Patreon at patreon.com/milesawaygames. It's the easiest way to support me and make sure that I can keep making these videos and not go back to my bartending job. Pledging on Patreon will give you early access to my Saturday Something weekly blog that I post on my Patreon. Higher levels will get you access to patron-only live streams that I'm starting to set up, and access to playtesting material that I'm working on as I start to work towards publishing some materials for Mothership and other games as well. Thanks again for watching. A special thanks to my patrons. Stay miles away from boredom, and I'll see you next time.